There are screams. And then there are the kind of screams that don't just echo in a room, they echo in your life. The kind you don't forget. The kind that follow you into adulthood, into silence, into dreams you wish you didn't have. At exactly 6:02 in the morning, 3 children stood frozen in a doorway, watching their father destroy their family. And the worst part? Their mother was 5 months pregnant. Now listen carefully,
What was that?
because that moment, that wasn't where this story began. That was where everything finally broke. He came home at 6 in the morning, reeking of another woman's perfume.
Where are you coming
And when his
from?
pregnant wife dared to
dare
ask
you
where
ask
he'd
me
been, he put his fist into her stomach. She was 5 months pregnant. And their 3 children were sleeping in the next room. Stay with me, because this story does not end where you think it does. In fact, the ending will change the way you see strength, survival, and what it truly means to be a mother. But first, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to before the monster showed up. Back to when Melvin DeShawn Jones was, by every outward appearance, a good man. The house on Delmar Avenue was not large. It was a modest 3-bedroom brick home on the east side of Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's name, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and where Sunday mornings smelled like fried catfish and gospel music drifting from open windows. It was the kind of block where people looked out for one another, because nobody had so much that they could afford not to. Melvin and Simone Jones had lived there for 7 years. To look at them, really look at them, you would have thought they were the picture of something beautiful. Melvin was 34 years old, broad-shouldered, with a slow, easy smile that could light up a room when he chose to use it. He had grown up in southwest Atlanta, raised by a single mother named Ruth, a woman who worked 2 jobs and went to church every Sunday and still found time to braid her neighbor's daughter's hair on Saturday mornings. Ruth Jones had poured everything she had into her only son, and for a long time, it seemed like it had worked. Melvin had graduated high school, gone to a technical college on a partial scholarship, and landed a job at Meridian Logistics, a mid-sized freight and supply chain company, where he worked as a floor operations supervisor. It wasn't a glamorous job. He wore a hard hat, managed a team of 14 men and women, and spent most of his shifts on his feet. But it paid a decent salary. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough to cover the mortgage. Enough to take the family out for dinner on Friday nights when things were good. And Simone Renee Jones, née Williams, was the kind of woman that people wrote songs about without knowing it. 33 years old, with deep brown skin and eyes that held a particular kind of warmth, the kind that made strangers feel immediately at ease. She was the second child of Gloria Williams, a woman who had raised 3 children alone after losing her husband, James Williams, to a sudden heart attack when Simone was just 6 years old. Simone had grown up watching her mother carry impossible weight with quiet grace. She had absorbed that lesson the way children absorb everything, without knowing she was learning it. Simone had worked as a medical billing specialist at a healthcare administrative company for 6 years. She was sharp, organized, and deeply responsible. When she married Melvin at 26 years old, she believed she was building something permanent, something real.
I do.
She had seen enough impermanence in her life to know how rare that was. They had 3 children together. Isaiah DeShawn Jones was 9 years old, tall for his age, with his father's broad forehead and his mother's quiet intelligence. He was in the 4th grade, loved science projects, and had recently decided he wanted to be an astronaut. He was the kind of boy who noticed things, the kind who sat silently and watched and filed everything away. Trisha Renee Jones was 7. She had her mother's eyes and her grandmother Gloria's laugh, this full, uncontainable sound that seemed too big for her small body. Trisha was the child who colored outside the lines on purpose because she felt the lines were suggestions, not rules. She danced in the kitchen while Simone cooked. She made up songs about ordinary things, her toothbrush, the rain, the way peanut butter smelled. And then there was Zoe, 5 years old. The baby, or she had been until the news came in early spring that another Jones was on the way. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We genuinely love connecting with you. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you're always in the loop for our upcoming videos. Simone was 5 months pregnant with their 4th child when everything fell apart. She had found out she was pregnant in January. A surprise, yes, but not an unwelcome one. She had cried a little when she saw the test, standing in the bathroom at 5:47 in the morning while the rest of the house still slept. Not from sadness, from the weight of it, from the understanding that another life was choosing her to carry it into the world. She had pressed her hand flat against her stomach and whispered,
Okay,
Okay,
baby, we got you.
Okay, baby. We got you. Melvin had been thrilled, or had seemed to be. He hugged her from behind in the kitchen, kissed her neck, and told her she was going to be the most beautiful pregnant woman in Georgia. He had said that with the same easy smile she had fallen in love with a decade ago. That was January. By March, Melvin Jones was a different man entirely. They say you never really know a person until the pressure is applied, until something cracks. And what nobody tells you is that sometimes the crack was always there. You just couldn't see it in the light. It started at work. Melvin had always had a temper. Simone knew this. His mother, Ruth, knew this. It was the one thing about him that had always flickered at the edges of his personality, like an ember that never quite went out. Manageable most of the time, but always there. He had worked for years to keep it in check. He had even attended an anger management workshop 3 years earlier. At Simone's gentle but persistent urging, he had completed it. He had gotten the certificate. He had framed it jokingly in the bathroom, and they had both laughed. But the ember was still there. At Meridian Logistics, Melvin's direct supervisor was a man named Gerald Henderson, a 51-year-old operations manager who had a reputation for being exacting, humorless, and completely unwilling to admit when he was wrong. The two men had clashed for years in the subtle daily ways that co-workers clash when they fundamentally do not respect each other. Small grievances, passive slights, the kind of professional tension that most people learn to navigate with forced smiles and careful language. In early March, there was an incident on the floor involving a scheduling error that cost the company a significant contract delay. Mr. So Henderson, in front of 14 of Melvin's direct reports, pointed to Melvin as the source of the error, loudly, specifically, and in terms that Melvin would later describe to Simone as disrespectful. Melvin did not walk away. What he said to Gerald Henderson in that moment, on that floor, in front of those 14 people, was enough to warrant a formal HR complaint. What happened next, when Mr. Henderson attempted to physically escort him out of the area, was enough to warrant a suspension. Melvin was suspended without pay, pending an internal investigation. He came home that afternoon and told Simone what happened. She listened. She held his hand. She told him they would figure it out. She told him to call a lawyer, to document everything, to be strategic. She was practical about it because she loved him and because she knew that practicality was what the moment required. Melvin nodded. He said she was right. He said he would handle it. He did not handle it. What Melvin did instead, what no one who loved him could have predicted, or perhaps what everyone who knew him truly should have seen coming, was unravel. The suspension, which was meant to be 2 weeks pending investigation, stretched into 3. Melvin, who had defined himself for years by the identity of being a provider, a supervisor, a man in charge, suddenly found himself at home in the middle of the day with nothing to do and nowhere to go. He had built his sense of self on a foundation of being needed at that job, and without it, he didn't know who he was. He started going out during the day, at first just to drive. then to sit in parking lots and call his friends, then to meet those friends at a sports bar on Campbellton Road called The Sideline, a dim, loud place that smelled like fried chicken wings and spilled beer, where the TVs were always playing basketball or football and nobody asked you why you weren't at work. He started drinking. At first, a beer or two in the afternoons. Then more. Then he discovered that the back room at the Sideline hosted a small poker game on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Men gathered around folding tables with cash and chips, and the kind of desperate hopefulness that gambling produces in people who are not equipped to handle loss. Melvin sat down at that table. Simone did not know any of this yet. She was managing. She was pregnant and working full-time remotely, and raising 3 children and managing the household, telling herself that Melvin just needed time, that any man would struggle with something like this, that he would come back to himself. She gave him the benefit of the doubt because she loved him, and because she had watched her mother give that same benefit of the doubt to life itself, again and again, after James Williams died and left Gloria with 3 children and a month's worth of grocery money and a faith that had to be rebuilt from scratch. Simone was her mother's daughter. She believed in staying, in holding on, in the power of not giving up on the person you chose. She did not yet understand that the person she had chosen was choosing someone else. It was a Thursday night in late March, a night when the Georgia air still carried the particular chill of a winter that hadn't quite decided to leave, when Melvin met Tanya Briggs
I
at
was
the
hoping
Sideline.
you'd show up.
She was sitting at the bar when he came in, wearing a red jacket over a black
what brings
dress,
a charmer like you
with
here?
the kind of beauty that announces itself and expects to be noticed. She was 30 years old, working as a nail technician at a salon 2 miles away, recently divorced, with a sharp wit and a bottomless capacity for finding the humor in other people's misfortune. She noticed Melvin because he was handsome, and because he carried his unhappiness in the particular way that some men carry it, not as sadness, but as restless energy, as movement, as a kind of voltage that other people can feel from across a room. She bought him a drink. He bought her too. By 11 o'clock, they had talked for 4 hours and moved from the bar to a corner booth. By midnight, they were exchanging numbers. By 1 o'clock in the morning, Melvin Jones, who had a 5 months pregnant wife and 3 sleeping children at home on Delmar Avenue, kissed Tanya Briggs in the parking lot of the Sideline for a long time. He drove home at 2 a.m. and told Simone he had been at his friend Devin's house watching the game. Simone was half asleep. She nodded. She believed him. He texted Tanya before he even took his shoes off. What followed was the rapid, catastrophic unfolding of a secret life. Within 2 weeks, Melvin was seeing Tanya 3 and sometimes 4 times a week. He brought her flowers. Flowers he bought with money from the joint savings account he shared with Simone. He took her to dinner at restaurants he had never taken Simone to. He paid for her car to be serviced when it needed an oil change. He showed up at her apartment with champagne and the easy smile that Simone hadn't seen in months and didn't understand why. He was becoming, in Tanya's world, the man he no longer wanted to be in his own home. The savings account, which Melvin and Simone had been building for 6 years, carefully, methodically, through automatic transfers and tax returns and birthday money from Gloria, had held just over $11,000 in January. By the middle of April, it held $642. Melvin had spent $10,000 in 6 weeks. He had gambled some of it away at the Sideline. He had spent the rest on Tanya. On a woman who did not know, or perhaps did not want to know, that there was a pregnant woman and 3 children waiting for that money to keep the lights on, to keep food in the refrigerator, to keep hope from going completely dark. The refrigerator was empty on a Tuesday morning. Simone opened it and stood there for a long moment, staring at the bare shelves. Tricia was behind her, asking what was for breakfast. And Simone turned around, smiled at her daughter, and said, "Baby, we're going to have special pancakes this morning." She used the last of the flour and the last 2 eggs and made pancakes with no syrup. and she watched her children eat, and she told herself she was fine. She was not fine. The changes in Melvin were not subtle, though Simone worked hard to find subtle explanations for them. He stopped coming home for dinner. Then he stopped coming home before midnight. He slept in most mornings when he was home at all, and he contributed nothing to the management of the household. Not grocery runs, not school pickups, not bath times, not bedtime stories. He was physically present sometimes, but he had vacated the role of father and husband so completely that his presence in the house felt more disorienting than his absence. He began criticizing Simone. This was the part that broke her in a way that she didn't have language for at first. Because the criticisms were not about anything specific. They were about her. They were personal in the way that only someone who has studied you intimately can make something personal. He told her she had let herself go. He said it in the kitchen one Saturday afternoon, while she was standing at the stove, 7 months from their wedding anniversary, 5 months pregnant, stirring a pot of soup she was making to stretch the groceries because the account had been mysteriously thin for weeks. He said it casually, like a comment about the weather, and Simone stood very still with the wooden spoon in her hand and felt something crack inside her chest. She said quietly,
Melvin,
I
am pregnant.
I'm pregnant. He said,
I know what
you are. And he walked away. He told her on another occasion that he wished he had never met her. He said it during an argument that had started because she asked him, gently, carefully, for the 3rd time that week, where he was going when he left at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night with no explanation. He said it with a flatness that was somehow worse than anger. Like the words weren't even worth the energy of emotion. Simone did not cry in front of him. She waited until he left. She went into the bathroom, turned on the shower so the children wouldn't hear, and sat on the edge of the tub and cried until she had nothing left. Then she washed her face. Then she went back out and helped Zoe with her bath and read Trisha 2 chapters of a picture book and sat with Isaiah while he finished a math worksheet. She held it together because the children needed her to hold it together. She held it together because she was Simone Jones, née Williams, daughter of Gloria, granddaughter of Ida Mae Williams, women who had been holding things together since before holding things together was understood as a form of superhuman strength. But the cracks were getting wider. She suspected the affair. She hadn't confirmed it, not yet. But the evidence was accumulating in ways that even the most loyal wife couldn't explain away forever. The phone calls he stepped outside to take. The bathroom retreats when a text came in, and he didn't want her to see his face when he read it. The unfamiliar perfume that occasionally clung to his jacket, not overpowering, but there, distinct, feminine, not hers. The way he flinched slightly when she touched his arm sometimes, like she had interrupted something private. She asked him once if he was seeing someone. Directly. Sitting across from him at the kitchen table on a quiet Sunday morning while the children were still asleep. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between contempt and discomfort, and said,
Don't start.
Don't start. She pushed gently. She said she just needed to know the truth. He stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped against the linoleum, and he said, loudly enough that she worried about the children hearing, that she was paranoid, that she was always trying to start something, that he couldn't come home and have a single moment of peace. And when she said his name again, just his name, Melvin, his hand came across her face so fast she didn't see it coming. It was the first time. She stood there with her hand pressed against her cheek, staring at him. And he stared back at her, and she saw something move through his face. Shame, she thought briefly, before it hardened into something else. He told her not to push him.
Don't push me.
And then he walked out the front door. She stood in that kitchen for a long time. Simone did not tell her mother about the slap, not right away. Gloria Williams was 60 years old, with high blood pressure and a heart that had been stretched and squeezed by decades of doing more than her body was designed to do. Simone protected her mother the way Gloria had always protected her children, instinctively, without thinking, from a place so deep it didn't feel like a choice. But Gloria knew something was wrong. Mothers always do. She started showing up on Tuesdays with grocery bags. She didn't make a production of it. She would knock on the door, hand Simone 2 or 3 bags from the supermarket. Chicken thighs, rice, canned vegetables, cereal, fruit, juice boxes for the children, and say something like, "I got a little extra this week. No use letting it sit." She would come inside, play with the grandchildren for a while, look around the house with those knowing eyes, and leave without asking the questions she desperately wanted to ask. Simone's older brother, Andre, was 36. He worked in construction management, was built like a defensive linebacker, and had a face that seemed perpetually set to serious. Though the people who knew him knew that underneath that face was a man of profound loyalty and almost inconvenient love for his family. He had looked after Simone since they were children, in the way that older brothers look after sisters when there's no father in the house. Not in a controlling way, in a protective way, in an I am always going to show up way. Simone's younger brother, Darius, was 28, the baby of the family, with their father's easy laugh and their mother's quiet depth. He worked at a gym as a personal trainer, was going to school part-time for exercise science, and had an instinct for knowing when something was wrong with Simone that she had stopped being surprised by years ago. Both brothers had voiced their concerns about Melvin before. Not screaming, not ultimatums, just quiet, careful conversations. "Sis, you good? Melvin been acting right?" And Simone had always told them yes, always protected the family she had built, always given Melvin another chance, another explanation, another piece of her enormous capacity for grace. But the savings account drained to nothing, and the food ran out, and the slap happened. And Simone found herself in the middle of April, 5 months pregnant, with $642 in the bank, 3 children to feed, and a husband who came home smelling like someone else. She called her mother. She didn't tell Gloria everything. She told her some of it. The money being gone, Melvin being distant and strange, the children not having enough food. And Gloria Williams, who had raised 3 children on a shoestring and prayer after burying a husband at 32 years old, did not say, "I told you so." She did not say anything that resembled, "I told you so." She said, "I'm coming." And she came. She came on Thursdays now, too. She brought meals, pots of food she had cooked at home and transported in foil-wrapped containers, collard greens, smothered pork chops, macaroni and cheese, butter beans, the kind of food that says "I love you" without requiring the words, the kind that fills the stomach and somehow also reaches a little higher and fills something else. Darius started coming by on weekends, playing with the kids, fixing things around the house that Melvin had been ignoring, a leaking faucet, a light fixture that had been flickering for months, a screen door that didn't close properly. He never once said anything bad about Melvin directly to Simone. He just showed up and fixed things. That was how Darius loved. Andre checked in by phone and text almost every day. "You good, Simone? Kids good? Need anything?" He was watching. He was patient. But there was something in his voice, in the careful way he asked these questions, that told Simone he was not as calm as he was presenting himself to be.
Family time.
The family was holding the walls up from the outside, while Melvin knocked them down from the inside. And then came the night of April 23rd. What happened that morning, at 6:02 a.m., on a Thursday, would change every life in that house forever. Isaiah would not speak about it for 3 years. Trisha would wake up crying for 8 months. And Zoe, little 5-year-old Zoe, would for the rest of her childhood sometimes stop in the middle of playing and look up suddenly with a wariness in her eyes that no 5-year-old should have. But I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. Simone was not a weak woman. She was not a passive woman. She was not a woman who didn't see it coming. She was a woman who had too much love and too much faith in the person she had chosen, and that, in the cruelest possible irony, was her only crime. He had not come home. Simone had waited up until 2 a.m., sitting in the living room in the blue-gray darkness, her phone in her hand, the glow of the screen going dark every few minutes when she didn't touch it, then lighting up again when she did. She had called twice. Both calls went to voicemail. She had sent 3 texts. None of them were read. At 2 a.m., she went to bed. She lay on her side, the only comfortable position now, with the curve of her belly demanding its own space, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to the house, the tick of the hallway clock, the particular creak of the second step on the staircase, the soft, rhythmic breathing of the baby in her womb that she had begun to feel in earnest over the past few weeks. Small flutterings that reminded her, even in the darkest moments, that life was insisting on itself. She did not sleep. At 6:02 a.m., she heard the key in the front door. She heard his footsteps, heavier than usual, slightly unsteady. She heard the distinctive clink of his keys hitting the table by the door, where he always dropped them, except this time they hit the floor instead, and there was a pause before she heard him pick them up. She heard him in the kitchen, the refrigerator opening, a bottle of water, the close of the refrigerator. And then she heard him coming up the stairs. She sat up. He came into the bedroom and stopped when he saw she was awake. He was still dressed. Same clothes as the night before, she noticed. His collar was slightly askew. There was something in his eyes, not quite guilt, not quite shame. Something flatter than either of those things. He looked at her the way someone looks at an inconvenience they had forgotten about and are now annoyed to have to address. Simone said calmly, "And this matters. This deserves to be noted." She said it calmly.
Melvin, where have you been?
Melvin,
You didn't
where
come
have
home
you
last
been?
night.
You didn't come home last night. He said nothing for a moment. He set his jacket on the chair in the corner. He took off his watch. She said it again, not loudly, not with accusations or hysteria. She said,
I called you.
"I called you. You didn't answer. You didn't text back. Where were you?" Melvin turned around, and something that had been gathering in him, some accumulation of guilt and shame and the suffocating weight of the double life he'd been living, turned in the way that those things sometimes do in people who have not done the work of facing themselves, into rage. He said,
"How dare you ask me that?"
"You always want to start something." Simone said, "I'm asking you a question." He moved toward her. And everything after that happened with the terrible speed of violence, the speed that survivors always describe, the way they say it all happened so fast, the way the brain struggles to process something the body was not designed to withstand. He slapped her. She stumbled back against the headboard, her hand going instinctively, protectively to her stomach. He did not stop. What followed, and I will not describe it in more detail than is necessary, because there is a difference between bearing witness to pain and making a spectacle of it. What followed was a man hitting a pregnant woman, her stomach, her back, his foot connecting with her side. Simone screaming. Not screaming for help, not screaming his name, just screaming the way a body screams when it has no other language available. A raw, animal sound that cut through the quiet of the early morning like something breaking. 3 doors, 3 children. Isaiah, who was 9 and had been a light sleeper since he was a baby, and who had learned, because children learn these things when they live in a house with anger, to sleep with one ear partially open. Tricia, who had been woken at some point before this by voices and had been lying very still in her bed, frozen the way small animals freeze when they sense a predator. Zoe, who did not fully understand what was happening, but understood completely that her mother was in pain. 3 doors opened. 3 small figures appeared in the doorway of the master bedroom, and they saw. Isaiah moved first. He grabbed his father's arm with both hands, a 9-year-old boy grabbing a grown man, and cried, "Dad, stop! Stop!" His voice was breaking in the middle of every word, that particular crack of a child's voice when terror and love collide. Tricia had her arms around Simone from behind, crying with her whole body. Zoe was in the doorway, her hands pressed against her mouth, making a sound that was not a word and not a scream, but something between the two. "Dad, please, stop! Please! Dad, please!" And Melvin Jones stopped. He stepped back. He looked at his children. And something moved through his face. It was not transformation. It was not redemption. It was not the awakening of conscience. It was something closer to the recognition that he had been seen. That there were witnesses now. That the walls of the secret life and the home life had collapsed into each other in this room at 6:08 a.m. on a Thursday morning. He went to the closet. He pulled out a duffel bag. He moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had, perhaps, thought about this moment more than once. He packed clothes. He packed his charger. He packed the watch his grandfather had left him, the one with the engraving on the back that said "Carry the name right." And he put it in the bag without looking at it. Simone was on the floor beside the bed, one hand on her stomach, the other flat on the carpet. She was breathing, short, urgent breaths, and her children were around her, their small hands on her arms, her shoulders, her face. Melvin picked up the duffel bag. He walked out of the bedroom. He walked down the stairs. He walked out the front door. The sound of his car starting was, in the silence of that house, the loudest thing Simone Jones had ever heard. Simone did not call an ambulance immediately. She should have. She would later understand that she should have. That the first call in those moments needed to be 911, not because she couldn't handle it, but because there was a baby inside her who needed to be checked, whose safety mattered absolutely. But in that moment, her mind went to the children first. It always went to the children first. Isaiah had already gotten her water. He had done it without being asked, gone to the kitchen, filled a glass, come back, held it to her, his face so carefully composed into something that was trying very hard to be calm that it broke something in her chest. 9 years old, and already learning to manage his terror for someone else's benefit. She recognized that skill. She had learned it at the same age. Sitting beside her mother at a funeral for a man she hadn't lived long enough to fully know.
Mom,
She drank the water.
Yes, water,
She told the
please.
children she was okay. She said it 3
Zoe,
times with
Isaiah,
different
I'm okay.
words
Okay,
each time,
please.
trying to find the version that would reach each of them. She told Isaiah she was okay. His father had just gotten scared. They were going to be fine. She told Tricia she was okay. She just needed a minute. Nothing was broken. She told Zoe, who still hadn't spoken, who was just looking at her with those huge brown eyes. She said, "Zoe Bird, Mama's okay. Come here." And Zoe came. And Zoe pressed her face against Simone's neck, and Simone held her with one arm, and her other hand stayed on her stomach, monitoring, terrified, waiting to feel the flutter that would tell her the baby was still there, still present, still choosing life. She felt it at 6:23 a.m., a small, firm push against her palm. She closed her eyes. She called her mother at 6:31 a.m. Gloria answered on the second ring. Because
Hello?
Gloria Williams had
Mama,
spent 30
something
years
happened.
sleeping with the phone close and her ear partially open, just like Isaiah, because that is what it means to be the person everyone calls. Simone said,
Mama, something
"Mama,
happened.
something happened." That was all she said. Those 3 words. And Gloria said, "I'm coming." She was there by 7:45 a.m. She had called both boys on the way, Andre and Darius, and by 8 a.m. all 3 of them were on Delmar Avenue. They came in and they looked at Simone, the marks on her face, the careful way she was holding herself, the children clustered around her like small, solemn sentinels, and there was a moment where nobody spoke. Then Gloria went to her daughter. She held Simone the way mothers hold daughters, not gently, not carefully, but completely, with the full weight of a woman who has also been acquainted with pain and who knows that the antidote to it is not words, but presence. She held her, and she did not say anything for a long time. She just held her. Andre stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the floor. His jaw was working. His hands were in fists. He did not speak. Darius crouched down in front of the children, who were on the couch now, and he said, "Hey, I'm here. You guys hungry? Uncle D's gonna make some breakfast, okay? You want eggs?" He said it with the exact right amount of ordinary, the way you throw a lifeline into water by making it look like something else entirely. They nodded. Even Zoe nodded. Darius went to the kitchen and made eggs and toast and orange juice and brought it to the children on the couch on 3 separate plates, and he sat with them while they ate and watched cartoons, and he was very deliberately keeping their eyes and their minds pointing away from the bedroom where their mother was sitting with Gloria and Andre, speaking in low voices about what had happened. The conversation in that bedroom was careful and terrible and necessary. Gloria wanted to call the police. Simone hesitated, not because she didn't know that Melvin was wrong, not because she was protecting him, but because she understood, in the complicated, layered way that black women in America often have to understand these things, that calling the police set a chain of events in motion that she could not fully control. She had seen what happened in her neighborhood when police were called for domestic disputes. She knew men who had gone to jail for things that were absolutely jail-worthy and emerged from the system more broken than they'd gone in. She was not naive about any of this. She just needed a moment to think. Andre said very quietly, Simone.
He put his hands on you
while you were pregnant.
He put his foot into
your stomach. Silence.
He could have killed that baby.
He could have killed that baby. More silence.
He needs to answer for that.
He needs to answer for that. Simone pressed her lips together. Then she looked at her mother. Gloria had her hands folded in her lap, looking at her daughter with an expression that said, "I will follow your lead, but I need you to lead." "I want to get checked out first," Simone said finally. "The baby. I need to know the baby's okay." That was the right priority. Andre and Darius drove her to the OB/GYN's office. Gloria stayed with the children, and Simone sat in the back seat and looked out the window at the Atlanta morning coming to life, the city going about its ordinary business, and she thought about what she was going to do next. The OB/GYN, Dr. Patricia Osei, a Ghanaian-American woman with careful hands and kind eyes, examined Simone and ran an ultrasound. The baby was okay. The baby's heartbeat was strong and steady, a sound that filled the examination room like small thunder. Simone cried in the examination room. She had not cried yet, not in front of the children, not in front of her family, and now, alone with the doctor and the sound of that heartbeat, she cried until her shoulders shook. "Doctor." Osei put her hand on Simone's arm and said, "You did the right thing coming in. Baby is strong. You need to take care of you now, and you need to document what happened." She paused. "Do you have somewhere safe to be?" Simone thought of the house on Delmar Avenue with her mother and children in it. "Yes," she said. "I do." The family stayed with her that day. They ate lunch together. Gloria had made something, of course she had. And they sat around the kitchen table, the children slightly subdued but comforted by the presence of adults who loved them, and they were as ordinary as they could be for each other. In the afternoon, the brothers took the kids to the park. Gloria and Simone sat on the front porch and were quiet together in the way that two women who have shared a great deal of silence can be quiet together. By 3 p.m., they began to leave one by one. The children needed baths. There was school tomorrow. Life was insisting on continuing. And Simone was alone again in the house on Delmar Avenue. She lay in bed that night and did not know what was going to happen next. She only knew 3 things with certainty. Her children were safe, her baby was alive, and she had survived the worst night of her life. What she did not know was that Melvin was coming back. 2 days later, he came back, not to apologize, not to get on his knees, not to beg for forgiveness with the kind of sincerity that might have meant something. He came back the way men come back when they have nowhere else to be on a Tuesday morning. He came back like it was just another day. And Simone Jones, who is perhaps the most measured woman I have ever had the privilege of telling a story about, did not say a single word to him. She picked up her phone, and she called her brother. He pulled into the driveway in the same car, with the same face, wearing different clothes, fresh. So he had been somewhere with a closet, which told Simone everything she needed to know about where he'd spent the last 2 days. He came through the front door with the particular ease of someone who owns a space, who has not yet registered that ownership is a different thing from belonging. The children were at school. Gloria had taken them that morning, picking them up early and walking them in herself, leaning down to tie Zoe's shoelace on the school steps like it was any ordinary morning. Simone had watched from the window. She was in the kitchen when Melvin walked in. She was at the counter with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and she was looking at it. And when she heard his footsteps, she did not turn around. She set down the cup. She picked up her phone. She found Andre's name in her contacts, and she pressed call. Melvin came into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. He stood there looking at the sparse contents, a carton of juice her mother had brought, some leftovers in a container, a block of cheese, and he closed it. He looked at Simone's back. He said, "You got anything to eat?" Simone said into the phone, "Andre, I need you to come." Silence in the kitchen. Andre said, "I'm on my way." She pressed end. She turned around. She looked at Melvin for a long moment. Really looked at him. The way you look at someone when you are deciding something. And then she walked past him to the living room. She sat down on the sofa. She folded her hands in her lap. She said nothing. Melvin stood in the kitchen doorway. Something was shifting in him. She could see it, the unease of a man who had walked into a situation he hadn't fully prepared for. He had expected tears, maybe, or accusations, or crying, or the particular desperate pleading that domestic abusers rely on as their own twisted form of currency, the proof that the person they hurt still needs them. He had not expected this. He had not expected the stillness. "Simone," he said. She looked at him. He opened his mouth. He closed it. They sat in that silence for 31 minutes. At 8:16 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Simone stood, slowly, the way pregnant women stand, and she went to the door and opened it, and Andre and Darius were standing on the porch. Andre was in his work clothes, a fleece vest over a collared shirt, his work boots. Darius was in sweats. Neither of them was smiling. She let them in. She stepped to the side, and Andre walked past her into the living room and stood in front of Melvin Jones and looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then he said, You want to tell me why you put your hands on my sister? Melvin stood up from the chair he had eventually settled into. The air in the room changed. That particular atmospheric shift that happens when 2 men with grievances and pride and adrenaline occupy the same small space. Melvin said, This is between me and my wife. Andre said, Your wife called me. So now it's between us. Melvin laughed. It was the wrong kind of laugh, the kind that functions as a provocation. He said, Man, you don't need to be here. Darius, who had positioned himself near the hallway in the way that younger brothers of older brothers learn to position themselves, said quietly, Bro, don't do this. Melvin looked at Darius. Then he looked at Andre. Something in him, Some combination of shame and ego and the reckless courage of a man who had been running from himself for weeks made him say the thing that he should not have said. He pointed at Andre and said, I don't take instructions from a lowlife who's been living off his mama's. Andre's fist connected with Melvin's nose before the sentence was finished. The sound was decisive. The impact was immediate. Melvin staggered back, his hand flying to his face, blood appearing at once. The particular bright red of a broken nose, immediate and unmistakable. And Simone, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, who had been perfectly still through the whole terrible morning, moved. She crossed the room. She stepped between her brother and her husband. She put one hand on Andre's chest and one hand up toward Melvin, and she said, and her voice was completely steady, which was perhaps the most remarkable thing about this entire remarkable morning. She said, "Stop, both of you. Stop right now." Andre was breathing hard. His eyes were still locked on Melvin, but he stopped. He stopped because Simone asked him to, because she was his sister, because even in fury he had never been able to refuse her. Melvin held his nose, blood on his shirt, blood on his fingers. He was looking at Simone with an expression that had moved past anger into something she couldn't quite name. Simone lowered her hands. She looked at Melvin for a long time. She said, "Sit down, and let me tell you what's going to happen." What happened in that living room in the next 2 hours was not a fight. It was not a negotiation. It was something closer to a trial, except the jury was made up of 3 people who had already reached their verdict, and the defendant had no choice but to sit in the chair he had made for himself. Simone talked first. She spoke slowly and carefully, the way she always did when she needed to say something that mattered. She told Melvin what the last 6 weeks had been. She described the empty refrigerator. She described the children asking for food. She described the account balance. She showed him her phone, the banking app, the $642 that remained of $11,000 they had saved together over 6 years. She described the slaps, each one, the context, the words that accompanied them. She described the morning 2 days ago, and she looked at him steadily while she described it, not looking away, not sparing either of them. She said, "Your children watched you do that to me. Isaiah, Trisha, and Zoe watched their father put his foot into their mother's stomach while their baby brother or sister was in there." Melvin said nothing. "Dr. Osei says the baby is okay," she said. "I went to make sure. The baby is okay. But Melvin, that is not because of you. That baby is okay in spite of what you did." Melvin's jaw moved. His hands in his lap were very still. Then Andre said, "We found something." This was the second piece of the morning's wreckage. When Simone had been going through the house the day after Melvin left, taking stock, trying to understand the full scope of what had been taken from her, she had noticed something. A velvet box, the kind that holds jewelry, that had been kept in the storage bin at the top of the bedroom closet. It was a box that held her grandmother's ring, Ida Mae Williams's ring. Ida Mae had been a woman of extraordinary spirit and very modest means, and in her entire life she had owned one piece of truly valuable jewelry. A ring she'd received as a gift from her husband in 1962, a gold band with a small cluster of diamonds that was worth, by modern appraisal, perhaps $4,000. But its monetary value had nothing to do with why Simone kept it. It was the only thing she had that had belonged to Ida Mae, the grandmother she had known only through photographs and stories, the woman whose name she carried in her own middle name. The box was empty. He had pawned the ring. He had also taken a small collection of items from the storage bin that belonged to both of them. A gold chain Simone had received as a graduation gift, a watch Melvin's mother Ruth had given him that he was supposed to leave to Isaiah someday, 2 silver picture frames that had been wedding gifts. All of it was gone. When Andre placed the empty velvet box on the coffee table, The silence in the room was different from any of the silences that had come before. It was a heavier silence, a final kind. Melvin looked at the box. He did not say, "I can explain." He did not say, "I'm sorry." He looked at the empty velvet box that had held Ida Mae Williams' ring, and he looked like a man who had suddenly, in this moment, truly registered the full scale of what he had done. Simone said very quietly, "That was my grandmother's ring."
That was my grandmother's ring.
She said it without
Your
accusation.
grandmother's?
She
I had
said it
no
like
idea.
a fact that
It's
deserved
very
to
special
exist
to
in
me.
the room by
It's
itself
beautiful.
for a moment. Then Darius said, "There's someone else, isn't there?" It wasn't a question. Melvin closed his eyes. Simone said, "I know." She had known for weeks. She had known in the particular way that women who love honestly always know. Not from evidence, but from the quality of his absence, from the way he no longer looked at her with recognition. "I know there's someone else. I just needed you to admit it." Melvin opened his eyes. He looked at the floor. He said, very low, Yeah. One word. One word was all of it. The whole architecture of lies, the late nights and the phone calls in the bathroom and the perfume on his jacket and the $10,000 that had been their children's security, the whole thing collapsed into that one syllable. Yeah. Gloria, who had arrived somewhere during the conversation without anyone noticing, she had a key, she had always had a key, was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had heard the last part. She looked at her daughter, and her face was doing the thing that mothers' faces do when they absorb pain on behalf of their children. That particular stoic grief, that "I knew and I hoped I was wrong" expression that no child wants to see on their mother's face. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. And here is the moment, this is the exact moment that I need you to understand. Because this is where the story could have gone one of two ways. This is where Simone Jones could have crumbled. This is where, in a lesser story, a story about a lesser woman, the chapter would end with her on the floor, undone. But Simone Jones was not a lesser woman. She stood up. She stood up from the couch. She was 5 months pregnant with bruises still fading on her arms and her face, in a house that had $42 in the grocery fund and a storage bin that had been emptied of the things that mattered most. She stood up, and she straightened her back, and she looked at Melvin Jones, the man she had chosen at 26, the man she had made 3 children with, the man she was carrying a 4th child for, and she said, "We're done." Not, "I hate you," not, "You're going to pay for this." Not the kind of dramatic, incandescent declaration that gets written into movies. Just, "We're done." Simple, declarative, final in the way that only completely quiet things can be final. Melvin said, "Simone," she said, "No. I want you to hear me clearly, Melvin. We are done. I am going to find a lawyer. I am going to file for divorce. And until that process is complete, you are not going to come back into this house unless you're picking up the children for a scheduled visit, which I am extending to you because they are your children and they deserve to have their father, and I believe in their right to have their father in their life. But you are not coming back here as my husband. Because you have not been my husband. Not for a long time." Melvin was looking at her. There was something in his face. It was not redemption, and she was wise enough not to mistake it for that. It was recognition, the recognition of a man who has done something irreversible and is only now, truly, absorbing the irreversibility. "The ring," she said. "My grandmother's ring. You're going to get that ring back. I don't know how and I don't know when, but you are going to get it back. That is not negotiable." She turned to her brothers. "I need you to stay for a little while," she said, "while he gets the rest of his things." Andre nodded. She walked out of the living room. She walked into the kitchen. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, a habit from childhood, something her mother had taught her. The the way cold water could interrupt a spiral and bring you back to your body. She ran the water, and she stood there, and she breathed. From the living room, she could hear Melvin moving, the sound of him going upstairs, the sound of drawers, the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, once, twice, carrying things, the sound of the front door. Darius came into the kitchen. He stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there. After a while, he said, "You okay?" She said, "Not right now, but I will be." He said, "I know." She turned off the water. She dried her hands on a dish towel that had sunflowers on it, that she had bought from a dollar store 3 years ago, and that had somehow lasted cheerful and stubborn through all of it. She looked at the sunflowers on the dish towel for a moment. Then she said, "I need to pick up my kids from school." What came after was not a single moment of triumph. It was not a movie ending. It was, instead, the long, unglamorous, essential work of rebuilding a life that someone else had taken a wrecking ball to. She filed for divorce 3 weeks later. She found a family law attorney, a sharp, compassionate woman named Claudette Marsh, who had been practicing for 19 years and who looked at Simone's case and said,
We have
grounds. We have clear grounds, and we're going to protect you and your children." Claudette charged a sliding scale fee that Simone could afford, barely, with the help of a small advance from Andre. She called the domestic violence hotline. She had never thought of herself as someone who would need to call that number, which is exactly what the hotline counselors hear from the vast majority of the people who call. The woman who answered her call, a volunteer named Keisha, talked with her for 53 minutes. She did not tell Simone what to do. She helped Simone understand what her options were. She told Simone about resources in Atlanta, about emergency housing if she needed it, about support groups, about the particular kind of recovery that comes after what she'd experienced. Simone did not need emergency housing. She had Delmar Avenue. The mortgage was in both names, and Claudette's first move was making sure that Simone's right to the house was protected while the divorce proceedings moved forward. That was secured within a month. She filed a police report. This was the hardest thing. Not because she was afraid of Melvin retaliating. After that morning with her brothers, something had seemed to drain out of him, some terrible heat, and he had been, in the weeks that followed, distant but not threatening. No, filing the police report was hard because of the way it made her see herself as a victim. And Simone Jones, who had spent her entire life refusing to be defined by what had been done to her, had a complicated relationship with that word. But Claudette said, "The report isn't about the label. The report is about the record. It's about your children. It's about the next woman, if there is one. It's about making sure what happened to you exists somewhere that can't be denied." So she filed it. She went back to work. She had taken a week of emergency leave. HR had been kind, or at least procedurally accommodating, and when she returned to her desk in the second week of May, she sat down and opened her laptop and started doing medical billing with a baby doing somersaults in her belly and a bruise that was almost faded from her left cheek. Her co-workers were kind, in the careful, hovering way that people are kind when they know something has happened and are trying to be helpful without prying. Simone appreciated their restraint. She called Ruth Jones, Melvin's mother, because she felt Ruth deserved to know, and because Ruth had also loved her for 10 years, and because Simone was, above all, a woman who believed in honesty even when it was costly. The conversation was one of the most painful of her life. Ruth cried. She apologized. She said she didn't raise him like that. And Simone believed her, and she told her she believed her. She told Ruth that she didn't hate Melvin,
that can't be
that she
true.
needed distance
Oh my
and legal
God, I can't
protection,
believe it.
but that she did
I
not
have to
hate
go
him.
now. What am I
Ruth
going
cried
to
harder
do?
at that. Gloria came every Thursday and every Sunday now. She brought groceries and she cooked, and she sat with the grandchildren, and she said the rosary at the kitchen table at 8 p.m. every night she was there, her lips moving silently, her hands steady on the beads. She did not lecture. She did not offer opinions about Melvin that weren't asked for. She simply showed up and stayed. Andre paid 3 months of Simone's mortgage. She wrote it down in a notebook. Every dollar he gave her, the date, the amount. She told him she would pay it back. He told her to put the notebook away. She did not put the notebook away. Darius came every Saturday and took the kids to the park, the museum, the library, wherever they needed to go to feel like the world was still large and full of good things. He bought Isaiah a telescope for his birthday, a proper one, not a toy, and helped him set it up in the backyard, and they spent an evening looking at the moon together, and Isaiah said, with the precise solemnity of a 9-year-old who is trying not to cry about something else entirely, "Uncle D, do you think there are people on other planets?" And Darius said, "I think the universe is too big for us to be the only ones in it." And Isaiah thought about that for a long time. The children were getting help. Simone had found a child therapist through the school, a gentleman named Mr. Coleman, who specialized in childhood trauma and who was brilliant at making rooms feel safe. All 3 children started seeing him once a week. Isaiah's drawings, which had always been of space and rockets, began to include figures, people, families, sometimes a figure that was clearly a mother with a round belly. And Mr. Coleman said this was a good sign. Trisha's songs became more complicated. She was writing her own now, little melodies she hummed while coloring, and some of them were sad, but she put them on the page, and that was healthy. Zoe still woke up sometimes in the night, but less often. She had started talking about it, in her 5-year-old way, circling around it and approaching it sideways, and Simone held her through every telling and said every time, "We're safe now. You're safe. Here's the thing about Melvin that I haven't told you yet, because it matters, because no story is complete without the whole truth. In July, 2 months after he left, he called Simone at 11 o'clock at night, and he was crying. He called from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. But something, call it instinct, call it the particular maternal radar that doesn't switch off even for the people who've hurt you, made her pick up. She said, "Hello?" He said,
"It's me.
"It's me." She didn't say anything.
I know you don't want
He
to hear
said,
from me.
"I know you don't want to hear from me." She said, "What do you need, Melvin?" There was a long pause. She could hear him breathing. Then she heard it. That particular raggedness, that uneven rhythm of a man crying who doesn't want to be crying, who is fighting himself and losing. He said, "I'm at my mama's house," she said. "Okay." He said, "Tanya and me, it's done." He paused. "It was done a while ago. She didn't, it wasn't." He stopped, started again. "I threw everything away. I know that. I'm not calling to—" Another stop. "I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just needed you to know that I know what I did. I know." Simone was quiet for a moment. She said, "Are you getting help, Melvin?" He said, "I'm talking to someone. A counselor at the church. Mama made me go." She said, "Good." He said, "Is the baby okay?" "Yes, the baby's fine." "What are you— do you know what it is?" "A boy." Silence. She said, "Melvin, I need you to understand something. This call is— I'm glad you're getting help. Truly. I think that matters. For you and for the kids. But it doesn't change anything between us. You need to understand that." He said quietly, "I know."
I see.
She said, "The
That's
kids
fine.
need their father.
Okay.
I mean that.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not going to stop you from being their father, but you are going to be their father the right way, through the right channels, and you're going to do the work, the real work. Not for me, for them." He said, "I will." She said,
Okay, Melvin.
"Okay, Melvin."
Goodbye.
She said goodbye. She ended the call. She sat in the quiet of the Delmar Avenue house, the children asleep, the house peaceful in the way that houses become peaceful when the source of their disruption has been removed. And she pressed her hand against the drum of her belly and felt her son moving, The particular insistent push of him, like he was reminding her he was there. She said out loud to the quiet room, "It's just us now, baby." She turned off the lamp. She slept. Melvin DeShawn Jones Jr. was born on September 14th at 7:23 in the morning at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital. He weighed 8 pounds, 4 ounces. He had his mother's nose and his father's forehead and hands that seemed, even then, to reach for something. He announced himself with a cry that the nurse said was enthusiastic, which made Simone laugh despite everything, which made the nurse and the attending midwife also laugh, which filled the delivery room with a particular kind of joy that is only possible in the presence of new life. Gloria was in the room. The hospital had a one-support person rule, and Simone had chosen her mother. Andre and Darius were in the waiting room, where they had been for 11 hours, taking turns walking the hallway and bringing each other bad coffee from the vending machine and not talking very much because some waiting doesn't require words. When the baby came, Gloria held Simone's hand and said over and over quietly, "You did it. You did it. You did it." 3 words, the same 3 words, like a refrain, like a prayer. When Darius and Andre were allowed in, Darius held the baby first because Andre's hands were shaking too much. He held Melvin Jr. and looked at him for a long time, and then he looked up at Simone and said, "He looks like you," which was not entirely true but was the right thing to say. Andre took the baby next. He held him with the careful deliberateness of a man who is not accustomed to holding infants and is terrified of doing it wrong. He looked down at this new person, this person who had survived everything his mother had survived in the months of carrying him, and he cleared his throat and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and when he looked back down, his eyes were red. He said, "He's going to be all right." He was talking about the baby. He was also talking about Simone. He was also talking, perhaps, about all of them. This family that had been tested and bent and had held by some combination of grace and stubbornness and the particular kind of love that doesn't know how to stop. Melvin the father, was not in the hospital, but he had been told. Ruth Jones called him when she heard, and he called Simone's cell phone, and it rang unanswered because she was delivering their son, and then he called Andre, who picked up and who said, with no particular warmth, but also no particular hostility, "He's here, he's healthy, Simone's okay," and Melvin said, "Thank you," and Andre said, "You should send flowers." There was a pause. Then Melvin said, "Yeah.
Listen to me.
Yeah, you're right." The flowers arrived the next morning, white and yellow. No note, but white and yellow. In February, when little Melvin Jr. was 5 months old, when he had begun smiling at faces and batting at the mobile above his crib and making sounds that Tricia interpreted as very specific sentences. "He's saying he wants mac and cheese, Mama, I know it." Simone's doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. She opened the door. Ruth Jones was standing on the porch. She was 62 years old, small and precise, wearing a good coat and holding her purse with both hands the way she always held her purse. And she looked at Simone with the particular expression of a woman who has something to deliver and has been thinking about how to deliver it for some time. She said, "Good morning, Simone." Simone said, "Good morning, Ruth." Ruth reached into her purse. She took out a small velvet box. She held it out. Simone's hand went to her chest. She took the box. She opened it, and there it was, Ida Mae Williams's ring. The gold band and the small cluster of diamonds exactly as she remembered it, exactly as it had always been. A little more polished, if anything, than when she'd last seen it. She looked up at Ruth. Ruth said, "He went to 3 different pawn shops before he found the right one. Took him 2 months. He had to do some extra work for his cousin to come up with the money." She paused. "He wanted to bring it himself. I told him it wasn't his place yet. I told him the right thing to do was to make sure you got it back, and that the way he delivered it was your choice to make, not his." Simone was looking at the ring. Ruth said quietly, "I am so sorry, Simone, for what he did to you. I didn't raise him to be that man. I don't know—" Her voice caught. She steadied it. "I don't know where that man came from. But I know he's not the only man inside my son, and I'm not saying that to excuse what he did. I'm saying it because I need you to know that I see all of it." Simone closed the box. She stepped forward and put her arms around Ruth Jones. Ruth, surprised, held her back, and they stood on the porch of the house on Delmar Avenue on a February morning, two women who had loved the same man in the most different of ways, holding each other up. 1 year after the morning of April 23rd, 1 year after the worst night, here is where everyone stood. Isaiah DeShawn Jones, now 10, had won a school science fair with a project about the water cycle that his teacher called the most thorough entry we've had in 5 years. He still saw Mr. Coleman twice a month. He had started writing in a journal, a private one, kept under his mattress, which Simone had seen once by accident and not read. He had begun to speak about that morning in small pieces, to Simone, to Mr. Coleman, occasionally to Darius. He was learning slowly that what he witnessed was not his fault and was not his to carry alone. He still wanted to be an astronaut. He had added, or maybe a lawyer, to the list. Trisha Renee Jones, now 8, had started taking piano lessons. The music teacher said she had a natural sense of rhythm and an unusual ability to hear the emotional content of a piece. Her songs had gotten longer and more complex. Some of them were still sad. Some of them were beautiful in the way that only things that have been shaped by sadness can be beautiful. She had, without being asked, decided that little Melvin Jr. was her personal project, and she narrated his entire life to him daily, what he was seeing, what it meant, what would happen next. He found her, it seemed, completely riveting. Zoe Jones, now 6, had stopped waking up in the night. She had started kindergarten and declared on the first week that she was the boss of the class, a statement her teacher found both accurate and slightly alarming. She had told her kindergarten teacher during a sharing circle that her daddy made some very bad choices, but Mama says he's working on it. The teacher had called Simone that evening, not with alarm, but with a kind of gentle admiration, to relay the quote. Melvin DeShawn Jones Jr. was 5 months old and had already managed to completely reorganize the emotional landscape of every person who had met him. He smiled with his whole face. He grabbed fingers with a grip that seemed philosophically excessive for his size. He had a particular fondness for the sound of Gloria's voice, and would quiet instantly when she sang, which Gloria did often and without any self-consciousness, old gospel songs that had been in her family for generations. Simone Jones had gone back to work full-time when Melvin Jr. was 3 months old. She had hired a neighborhood woman named Miss Evelyn, a retired school teacher with a grandmotherly gravitas and an unimpeachable reputation, to care for the baby during the day. She was managing the mortgage. She was managing the household. She was, as Claudette Marsh would later say in an affidavit, a woman of extraordinary resilience. The divorce was finalized in November.
Thank you so
The settlement included child support for all 4 children, a share of Melvin's pension, and the return of the pawned items, or their equivalent value, through the negotiated agreement. Claudette had been thorough. She had been, in fact, magnificent. Simone was not dating. She was not interested in dating. She was, as she told her mother one evening on the phone, busy being myself for a while. Gloria had said, "Good. That's the most important person you can be." She had started going to a support group for survivors of domestic abuse, a Thursday evening group at a community center 6 blocks from the house. She had gone once because Keisha from the Hotline suggested it. She had kept going because the women in the room understood something that people outside the room couldn't quite reach, no matter how much they loved her. They understood the particular mathematics of surviving something that was done to you by someone you loved. They understood why the question, "Why didn't you leave?" was not just unhelpful, but revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what love and fear and hope do to a person's architecture. She had spoken at the group twice, not about Melvin specifically, about surviving. About the moment when you decide that what's on the other side of the storm is worth walking through it to reach. About being pregnant and bruised and broke and choosing still to stand up. She was not a public speaker. She was not interested in making her pain into a performance. But in that room on those Thursday evenings, she offered what she had, and what she had was enough. Melvin Jones was in an intensive outpatient program for anger management and substance abuse. He had lost his job at Meridian Logistics. The suspension had eventually resulted in termination for reasons having nothing to do with his family situation and everything to do with the original incident. And he was working at a warehouse on the north side of Atlanta, night shifts, which humbled him in ways that were probably necessary. He attended every scheduled visit with his children. He was never late. He brought snacks. He watched what his children needed and tried, awkwardly and imperfectly and with genuine effort, to provide it. He had not seen Tanya since the spring. He was living at Ruth's house. He had a room in the back, small and clean, with a window that looked out at the backyard where he had played as a boy. Ruth cooked for him on the nights he was home. She did not coddle him. She also did not reject him. She was, in the way of women who have survived the most, doing the most complex thing, holding both truths simultaneously. Her son had done something terrible. Her son was still her son. Both things were true. Neither canceled the other. He was not a good man yet. He was becoming one. That is a different thing, and it is a slower thing. And it requires more from a person than any single dramatic act of contrition. It requires the daily choice, over and over, to do differently than you did yesterday. It requires facing yourself in the mirror of other people's pain and not looking away. It requires the particular courage of a person who has forfeited the right to be trusted and is committed anyway to becoming trustworthy. Melvin was doing that work. Whether it would be enough to earn anything back, enough to become the father his 4 children deserved, enough to make peace with what he had done and build something worth having from the ruins of what he had destroyed. That remained, on the morning of April 23rd, 1 year later, an open question. Some open questions are not answered in the span of a story. Some of them take a lifetime. Some of them are the question itself, the living of it, and the point is not the answer, but the commitment to keep asking. Gloria Williams was 61 now and had been told by her doctor to take her blood pressure medication more consistently. She was trying. She came to Delmar Avenue every Thursday and every Sunday, and she brought food, and she sang to Melvin Jr., and she watched her daughter manage the impossible with a grace that consistently broke and remade her heart. She had started attending a women's Bible study on Wednesday mornings at her church, where 6 women gathered to read and talk and laugh and sometimes cry, and she had discovered that the particular isolation of being a woman who handles everything alone could be interrupted gently by the company of women who understood. She was, on balance, okay. She had always been okay. That was Gloria Williams's particular gift and particular burden. She was always okay. She had been okay since James died. She had been okay through the years of raising 3 children alone. She was okay now, watching her daughter heal. But occasionally, on Saturday mornings when she was alone in her own kitchen with a cup of coffee and the radio playing something soft, she would sit for a moment and allow herself to not be okay, to feel the weight of everything she had carried for 3 decades, to miss James, to be tired of being strong. And then she would finish her coffee, and she would get up, and she would go about her day. Andre Williams had started mentoring young men at a community organization in his neighborhood. One afternoon a week, he went and sat with boys between 12 and 17, most of them in situations where the concept of a stable, present, responsible male figure was either absent or complicated. He had started doing it, he told Darius, because of Isaiah. Because watching his nephew navigate what he had navigated at 9 years old, with that particular combination of vulnerability and quiet strength, had made Andre think about all the boys who did not have a Simone Jones at home, who did not have a family that showed up. He did not consider himself a role model. He considered himself a man who showed up, which was, when you thought about it, exactly what the boys needed. Darius Williams had finished his degree in exercise science in December. He had started working at a rehabilitation center, helping people recover from physical injuries and surgeries. He was good at it. He had, it turned out, an unusual capacity for reading what people needed, whether they needed to be pushed or given permission to rest, that had nothing to do with his education and everything to do with having grown up watching women manage impossible things with quiet determination. He was still at the gym on the side. He had started dating someone, a woman named Priya who worked at the rehab center and who had, at their third dinner together, asked him very directly what his family was like. He had talked about them for 2 hours. At the end, she had said, "You really love them."
They're
And he had
everything.
said, "Yeah, they're everything." It is a Thursday morning in April. The kind of Atlanta morning where the dogwoods are just starting and the air has that particular not quite warm quality that makes you want to leave your jacket at home and then regret it by 7 a.m. The sky is that clear particular blue that happens between seasons, before the summer heat settles in and takes up permanent residence. On Delmar Avenue, the house is awake. Simone is in the kitchen at 6:15 a.m. because Melvin Jr. woke at 5:30 and did not go back to sleep. And so she brought him downstairs and put him in his bouncer on the kitchen table, and he is watching her with the solemn attention of a 5-month-old who has decided that his mother is the most interesting thing in the world, which Simone finds alternately flattering and exhausting, and ultimately correct. She is making coffee. The kitchen smells like coffee and toast and the particular morning smell of a house with children in it, that warm, slightly chaotic smell that is one of the most underrated smells in the human experience. Isaiah comes down at 6:45, already dressed for school, backpack on, looking for his science fair permission slip that was definitely on the counter last night and has now somehow migrated to an unknown location. Simone finds it in 10 seconds, under a cereal bowl. Isaiah says, "Thanks, Mom," with the particular economy of a 10-year-old who saves his words for the things that really need them and heads back upstairs. Trisha comes down at 7 o'clock, hair needing 2 more minutes of attention, carrying a song she started writing last night that she needs Simone to hear before school, and Simone listens, really listens. Not the distracted half-listen of a tired parent, but a full, present attention, and says, "Trisha, that part in the middle, that part is something else. That part is special." And Trisha beams in the way that only Trisha can beam, like she's containing a small sun. Zoe comes down at 7:10 loudly announcing that she had a dream about a purple elephant who could skateboard, and she needs everyone to understand the full complexity of this dream, and she narrates it in extraordinary detail while eating her toast, and Melvin Jr., from his bouncer, watches her with what can only be described as admiring astonishment. Gloria arrives at 8 o'clock because it's Thursday. She comes in, and she holds the baby, and she makes a second pot of coffee, and she stands in the kitchen of the house on Delmar Avenue in the April morning light. And she looks at her daughter. This woman, this daughter she grew from a child with a motherless look in her eyes and a stubbornness that scared her sometimes. And she thinks, we made it. Not past tense, not finished, not the we made it of something complete and closed, the we made it of this moment, this morning, this cup of coffee, this baby in her arms, These children coming down the stairs one by one into a day that will ask things of them, and they will answer, because they are who they are. Gloria Williams has learned that this is enough, that the gift is not certainty or safety or the absence of pain. The gift is the morning. The gift is the next morning. The gift is the daughter who stood up.
Good morning, Mama. Good morning,
Simone
baby.
pours her coffee.
How are you?
She sits at the table across from her mother and her son.
He's so happy this morning.
The sun is coming through the kitchen window. That particular slant of April light that feels almost intentional, like it's aiming specifically at this table, this morning, these people. She wraps both hands around her mug. She looks at her mother. She says, "Good morning, Mama."
Good morning,
Gloria
baby.
says, "Good morning, baby."
How'd you sleep?
And Melvin Jr., who has been waiting for a pause in the conversation, makes a sound, a completely sincere, non-ironically enthusiastic sound, that everyone in the room agrees means something important. They are all laughing when Isaiah comes back downstairs for his permission slip. "What?" he says, looking around at the laughing women and the laughing baby and the morning light on the table. "What's so funny?" Simone reaches over and pulls him into a one-armed hug, her coffee still in her other hand. And she says into the top of his head, "Nothing, baby. Everything's fine." He leans into her for exactly 3 seconds, 10 years old, almost too cool for this, not quite, and then straightens up. He says, "Okay, I'm going to miss the bus." She says, "Go." He goes. She sits back down. She picks up her mug. She is not finished. She is not all right in the way that means she has arrived at a destination. She is in the middle of it. The beautiful, complicated, exhausting, grace-soaked middle of rebuilding a life. There are hard days ahead. There are bills and court appearances and children's questions she will not know how to answer, and nights when the weight of it will settle on her chest like something physical, and she will have to remind herself, again, of what she told the baby in the bathroom in January. "Okay, we got you." But today is a good day. Today the light is coming through the window, and her mother is holding her son, and her children are going to school, and the dogwoods are blooming on Delmar Avenue, and she is, by every measure that matters, still standing. She is still standing. Simone Jones did not get the ending that movies give you. She did not get a man who transformed overnight into everything he should have been. She did not get an apology that undid the damage. She did not get her grandmother's ring back without having to fight for it. What she got was something harder and more valuable than any of those things. She got to find out who she was when everything that wasn't her was stripped away. She got to find out that her children were strong because she was strong. She got to find out that love, real love, the kind her mother had modeled, the kind her brothers had lived, the kind she herself had practiced on children who needed her. That kind of love is not something a person can take from you, even when they take everything else. She got her morning, every morning. And if you are watching this right now and you recognize something in this story, not just Simone's story, but the story of a woman who stayed too long and believed too hard and gave too much and survived anyway, then I want you to know something. You are not foolish for having loved someone fully. You are not weak for having held on. You are not defined by what was done to you in the dark. You are defined by what you did next.
I remember feeling
You are
so
still
alone,
standing.
like no one could understand.
That means something.
But coming here, sharing
If
with
this
all of
story
you, I
moved you,
started to heal.
if it said something
Thank you for
true,
being here.
share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And remember, the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to be finished.